The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. On the morning of May 18th, 1927, in a quiet farming community in central Michigan, a series of explosions ripped through the Bath Consolidated School, killing 38 children and 6 adults. It remains the deadliest act of mass murder at a school in American history, and the man behind it had been planning the massacre for months, hiding in plain sight as a respected member of the community. This is the story of Andrew Kehoe and the Bath School disaster. Bath Township, Michigan, in the 1920s was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. It was a rural community of modest farms, dirt roads, and church suppers. The Bath Consolidated School was the pride of the township, a relatively new building that had opened in 1922 to replace several smaller one-room schoolhouses scattered across the area. It represented progress, community investment, and above all, hope for the next generation. The school served children from first grade through 12th, and on any given day, more than 300 students walked through its doors. No one could have imagined that the building itself had been turned into a weapon. Andrew Philip Kehoe was born in 1872 in Tecumseh, Michigan. By most accounts, he was an intelligent but deeply difficult man. Neighbors described him as meticulous, obsessive about neatness, and quick to anger over perceived slights. He attended Michigan State College, studying electrical engineering, and was known to be handy with machinery and wiring. In 1919, he and his wife Nellie moved to a farm just outside Bath Township. Kehoe quickly became involved in local politics. He was elected to the school board in 1924, and he served as the township clerk. He was, on paper, a pillar of the community. But beneath the surface, Andrew Kehoe was a man consumed by resentment. The root of Kehoe's fury was taxes. When the Bath Consolidated School was built, the township levied a property tax increase to pay for it. Kehoe was incensed. He believed the tax was unfair, that it was driving him toward financial ruin. His farm, which he had purchased with a mortgage, was not performing well, and his wife Nellie suffered from chronic illness, likely tuberculosis, which added to their financial burden. Kehoe became convinced that the school board, and specifically the superintendent, Emery Hike, were personally responsible for his troubles. He campaigned relentlessly against the school taxes, ran for township clerk partly to oppose them, and grew increasingly isolated and bitter when his efforts failed to reduce the levies. At school board meetings, he was known for being combative, obstructionist, and hostile. But no one took him for a killer. What no one knew was that beginning in the summer of 1926, nearly a full year before the attack, Andrew Kehoe had begun secretly stockpiling explosives. He purchased pyrotol, a surplus explosive sold commercially after World War I for use in farming and stump removal. He also acquired dynamite. Over the course of many months, Kehoe made repeated trips to the school, where he served as an unofficial handyman and maintenance man, a role that gave him unrestricted access to the building, including the basement. Slowly, methodically, and with terrifying patience, he wired hundreds of pounds of pyrotol and dynamite beneath the school. He ran the wiring behind walls and under floorboards. He hid the explosives in the crawl spaces and along the foundation. He set up an alarm clock timing device to trigger the detonation. For months, children sat in their classrooms directly above enough explosives to level the entire building. And no one suspected a thing. The timeline of May 18th, 1927 began before dawn. At approximately 5:45 in the morning, Andrew Kehoe murdered his wife Nellie. The exact method remains debated by historians, but she was found in the ruins of their farm, her body badly burned. It is believed he struck her and killed her before the events of the day unfolded. He then set incendiary devices throughout his farm, his house, and his outbuildings. He attached a timing device to firebombs rigged to his property. He had also cut down every tree on the farm and severed the fence wires, acts of deliberate destruction carried out in the days prior. Kehoe intended to leave nothing behind. At approximately 8:45 that morning, the firebombs ignited at the Kehoe farm. Neighbors saw the flames and smoke rising from the property and began rushing toward it. At virtually the same moment, at 8:45, the timing device at the Bath Consolidated School triggered the first explosion. The entire north wing of the building erupted. The blast was catastrophic. The roof collapsed, walls blew outward, ceiling beams and concrete crashed down onto classrooms full of children. First responders described a scene of absolute horror. Tiny bodies were buried under rubble. Children screamed from beneath collapsed walls. Survivors stumbled out covered in dust and blood. Parents rushed to the school from every direction, many of them barefoot, having run from their farms the moment they heard the blast. Rescuers began digging through the debris with their bare hands, pulling out the living and the dead. 36 children and 2 teachers were killed in the North Wing explosion. Many more were critically injured, but the devastation could have been even worse. Investigators later discovered that only roughly half of Kehoe's explosives had actually detonated. An additional 500 pounds of dynamite and pyrotol were found beneath the south wing of the school, fully wired and ready to explode. A short circuit or a faulty connection had prevented the second set of charges from igniting. Had the full cache detonated, it is likely that every person in the building, more than 300 students and staff, would have been killed. But Andrew Kehoe was not finished. Roughly 30 minutes after the school explosion, as rescuers swarmed the scene and the community reeled in shock, Kehoe drove his Ford pickup truck to the school. The truck had been loaded with shrapnel, nails, old farm tools, and pieces of metal. Hidden beneath the debris in the truck bed was more dynamite. Kehoe pulled up near the crowd of rescuers. Superintendent Emery Hike, the man Kehoe blamed for his financial troubles, approached the vehicle. Witnesses recalled that Kehoe appeared calm, eerily composed. Some accounts suggest he may have even smiled. Then he detonated the truck. The blast killed Hike, a retired farmer named Nelson McFerrin, the village postmaster Glenn Smith, and Kehoe himself. Smith's 8-year-old daughter, Cleo Clayton Smith, was also mortally wounded and died later from her injuries. Shrapnel tore through the crowd of rescuers. The second explosion added a final, sickening layer of carnage to an already unthinkable morning. In total, 44 people were killed in the Bath school disaster. 38 of them were children between the ages of 7 and 14. 58 others were injured, many of them severely. It was, and remains, the deadliest mass killing at a school in American history, a record that has stood for nearly a century. The scale of premeditation was staggering. This was not a crime of impulse. Andrew Kehoe had spent close to a year planning, wiring, and preparing for this act of mass murder. He had destroyed his own property, killed his wife, bombed a school full of children, and then driven into the crowd to kill himself and as many others as possible. In the aftermath, investigators found a wooden sign wired to the fence of Kehoe's destroyed farm. Stenciled onto it were 5 words that have chilled historians ever since: "Criminals are made, not born." It was Kehoe's final message to the world, a statement that seemed to blame society, the tax system, the school board, and everyone but himself for what he had done. The sign has been interpreted in many ways, but its cold precision mirrors the cold precision of the attack itself. The response to the disaster was immediate and overwhelming. The American Red Cross set up operations in Bath Township. Governor Fred Greene visited the site. Senator James Couzens donated $75,000 to a relief fund. Famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, who had just completed his transatlantic flight days later, reportedly delayed celebrations to pay respects to the victims. The entire nation mourned, but in the decades that followed, the Bath school disaster faded from public memory in a way that few tragedies of its magnitude have. Some historians attribute this to the era. The late 1920s offered no television news, no 24-hour media cycle, no internet to keep the story alive. Others suggest that the sheer horror of the crime, the deliberate targeting of young children, was something the country simply could not process and chose to forget. Today, a small memorial park stands on the site of the former Bath Consolidated School. A cupola salvaged from the original building sits atop a monument. The names of the 44 victims are etched into stone. Each year on May 18th, the community gathers to remember. The school was rebuilt, and life went on in Bath Township, as it always does in small towns shaped by unspeakable loss. But the questions raised by the disaster have never been fully answered. How does a man hide this much rage, this much planning, from an entire community for an entire year? How does someone who serves on a school board, who walks among children every day, wire explosives beneath their classrooms without a single person noticing? And perhaps the most troubling question of all, in a nation that has since endured tragedy after tragedy in its schools, why has the deadliest school massacre in American history been so thoroughly forgotten? The Bath School disaster was not the first act of mass violence in this country, and it was far from the last. But its lessons about isolation, about rage, about the catastrophic consequences of unchecked resentment remain as urgent today as they were on that spring morning in 1927. Remember their names. Remember Bath. The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.